What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to talk about a really famous operation during World War II called Operation Chariot. It occurred during 1942 when the battle for the Atlantic was really at its lowest point for the Allies. The Germans were producing about 20 U-boats per month, and the British Navy was in deep trouble. They did not have enough ships to protect the convoys bringing food to the UK, and Britain was starting to starve. On top of that, the Germans just recently deployed the Tirpitz. It was the fastest and most modern naval ship at the time. The battleship was tested in the Baltic Sea, and Churchill knew that if this ship got amongst the convoys in the Atlantic, it would be a disaster. Therefore, all efforts were made to think about how to put the Tirpitz out of action, so they came up with a little operation called Chariot. There were a number of different plans that was looked at as they were planning for Operation Chariot, but none of them were really considered. You couldn't go over land to take out the dry docks because, well, France was occupied by Germany, and there was 5,000 Nazi troops stationed in the town of St. Nazaire alone. You couldn't bomb the dry dock because, well, World War II bombing wasn't exactly accurate, and you didn't want to hit the town and, cause civilian casualties. You couldn't bombard it from the sea, because the mouth of the estuary where the dry dock was located was 6 miles away. You couldn't get a ship with a gun big enough down that estuary to do any harm to that thing, and you couldn't very well hit it from 6 miles away. So the only plan left on the drawing board was a very suicidal and daring plan submitted by Lord Louis Mountbatten. And his plan was this. He was going to blow up the gate of the dry dock itself using a brand new unit called the Commandos, which weren't very popular in their own right. They were the brainchild of Winston Churchill. They were only recruiting from the best of the British Army. The cream rises to the top, as they say, and they were taking that cream. They were only recruiting the most maverick, the most daring, and the most intelligent of Army soldiers. Their training was completely different from that of the British Army. You could say that discipline wasn't exactly a top priority, but it was there. The job was given to them, and the plan was considered pretty much suicide. He had a hard time persuading the Navy and Royal Air Force to commit to the operation. This was because the plan consisted of the 264 commandos to board 2 Navy destroyers and sail to the mouth of the estuary. There they would light fuses in the destroyers and creep up the middle of the estuary, which at high tide was only about 10 feet deep, and somehow they weren't going to be seen while doing this. And as you can see from the map, there's about 80 gun emplacements and countless searchlights protecting the estuary. So you can see why some other officers in the British Navy and Air Force were having a hard time trying to commit to this. At the same time, the Royal Air Force would distract the Germans with a bombing raid over St. Nazaire. The destroyer carrying the 41 pounds of explosives would then make straight for the 1,500-ton dock gate and embed itself into the gate itself. The commandos would then jump off the ship and start fighting the 5,000 German troops stationed at St. Nazaire. This meant that the commandos were outnumbered 20-1, mind you. While the majority of the commandos fought the Germans, demolition teams would blow up the winding houses in the pumping station, thereby completely crippling the dry dock. Then, after both targets had been blown up, the ship would detonate, destroying the gate. The commandos would then head for the jetty, board the second destroyer, which had somehow survived all the fire, and then, make their way home. Yeah. Lord Mountbatten argued that the sheer ludicrousy of this plan therefore guaranteed its success. The Germans would never see it coming. I mean, you kind of have to agree with him, I guess, in that sense. Before the commandos left England, things already began to go wrong. As I mentioned, the Royal Navy was not too keen on the plan. They only lended one ship to this operation, the HMS Campbeltown. It was a World War I American destroyer that was on loan to the British, so it wasn't even really a British ship. This ship was far suited for the job. It was known for its slow speed, poor maneuverability, and it had a very large turning circle. On top of that, they only had 12 days to disguise the ship and turn it into a floating bomb. The job was given to an explosive expert by the name of Lieutenant Nigel Tibbets. The main problem that he faced was where to position the 41 pounds of explosives. This would depend on how the ship would react to the impact of the dock gate. Finally, he made the decision to place the explosives about 40 feet from the bow of the boat near the keel. The next decision that Tibbets had to make was about the fuses, which were very advanced for the time. When you pressed the top of the fuse, it would release a drop of acid, which would burn through a strip of wire. Then, when it had snapped, it would release a spring that would then set off the detonator. However, this had problems too. The fuses were susceptible to jolts and shock, and also the strength of the acid varied, the thickness of the wire varied, and the tension of the spring varied from every fuse. Due to these complications, Tibbets could not say to within an hour of when the fuse was set when the bomb might go off. After that problem, the Navy had other problems to sort out, like not having a second destroyer, not having a way home. The solution was found when they found 16 wooden boats. That's wooden. They were made out of fucking wood. They had no armor, and their fuel tanks were located on the outside of the ship on the deck. They were far suited from the job. As the Air Force didn't like the plan, they only had to commit about 35 aircraft instead of the 100 bombers that Lord Mountbatten had asked for. This was because the Royal Air Force said that any more bombers committed to the operation would jeopardize their other commitments. Yet, despite all these challenges, at 2 p.m. on the 26th of March 1942, the Armada, if you can call it that, set off with all 264 commandos and 357 Navy personnel. 33 hours later, they found themselves staring down the mouth of the estuary, and it was here that Tibbets set his fuses. As they were coming up the mouth of the estuary, though, it was discovered that the Royal Air Force was doing exactly what they weren't supposed to do. They couldn't bomb the town because of cloud cover. So, unsure of what to do, the planes just flew around in circles, which alerted the Germans. Consequently, the Germans spotted the destroyer and signaled it. Luckily, however, the commandos happened to have a German code book, so they replied correctly. However, it wasn't very much longer before the Germans realized that this wasn't a German ship, and suddenly all 80 guns started tracking and firing upon the destroyer. As the Campbeltown steamed down the estuary, the captain steering the ship was killed. Tibbets, the demolition expert, saw this and jumped up and grabbed the helm. His inexperience, though, led him to plot a course towards the wrong lighthouse, but thankfully at the very last minute, while going 22 knots and, still taking enemy fire, he managed to correct course and successfully rammed the ship against its objective, the dockyard gates, with the explosives exactly where they were supposed to be. By this point, the 5,000 German troops that were in the town pretty much knew that something was going on and were all grabbing their guns and scrambling, trying to figure out what was going on over at the dockyards. They were looking for a fight. Luckily, the commandos were ready and willing to give them one. The commandos had to jump 8 feet from the deck of the boat to the dock gate and began taking on the Germans. They were shooting anything that moved and blowing up anything that looked important. It was complete and total chaos. The demolition crews successfully completed their objectives of blowing up the pumping houses and the winding station, and with their objective complete, the commander gave the signal, time to extract. They made their way down to the jetty where their extraction boats were supposed to be waiting for them, and unsurprisingly, there was no extraction boats waiting for them. You see, while the commandos were busy accomplishing their objectives in the dockyards, their extraction boats were getting picked off one by one. There were 16 small wooden targets just sitting stationary in the estuary, and the majority of them had been blown up due to their exposed fuel tanks. According to witnesses, the whole estuary was on fire. The commandos had to revise their plan, and they revised it fairly quickly. And just get a load of this. They decided that they would then fight their way through the town. By this point, there was 150 of them left, versus 5,000 Germans. They would fight their way through the town, and in groups of 2s and 3s, they would make their way to Spain, which was 350 miles away. However, they still had to get through the town, and with 5,000 Germans looking for a fight, they were pretty much trapped. The only way out was through a heavily guarded bridge, and it was suicide. But hey, the commandos are used to this kind of thing. So led by a man by the name of Captain Roynard, they charged the bridge, and guess what? They made it across and into the town, where they took the fight to the Germans in the town. Splitting off into groups of 2s and 3s, the commandos fought their way to safety, some of them managing to actually make it to Spain, but the majority of them were captured in the town. By 3 a.m., they noticed that it was oddly quiet. They heard no big boom. It was about 3 hours past the point that they expected the detonation to go off. And by then, the Campbeltown was now crawling with German soldiers. Fearing that the bombs had been detonated and their mission was a failure, the commandos were pretty much demoralized by this point. Sometime the next morning, they were being paraded by the ship, and the German officers were pretty much congratulating them on the daringness of their raid. They were pretty much in disbelief that the British would actually try to attempt such a feat. They made no mention of the explosives on board, though, so the commanders of the British commandos were still hopeful that the demolition charges were still in place. They were very nervous when they were paraded past the ship, sitting up on top of the dock gates. By 10 a.m. on the morning of the 29th of March, the Campbeltown suddenly exploded in a gigantic explosion, which did so much damage to the gates that they weren't able to be repaired until 1947. The result was that the Tirpitz had now been forced to spend the duration of the war in the dry docks of Norway. The Germans were furious, threatening the commandos, threatening to execute them on the spot. The commandos were just laughing. They had accomplished what they had set out to do and replied with, "Go ahead and do what you got to do. We've already accomplished what we set out to do." Operation Chariot was a success. It had eliminated the threat of the Tirpitz, which allowed the Battle of the Atlantic to be won. However, there were consequences for such a daring operation. 168 naval personnel and commandos died. 214 were taken prisoner, 222 managed to get back to England on the surviving wooden boats, and only 5 made it to Spain. Due to the massive destruction carried out by the commandos, Hitler was so angry that he passed a rule that all future captured commandos were to be shot on the spot immediately as spies. This operation was remembered for 2 things. Firstly, for the huge disruption of the German war effort that the damage caused, and secondly, for the 5 Victorian Crosses that were awarded for the incredible bravery against all odds shown that night. The 5 Victorian Crosses were the most ever awarded for one operation. The Tirpitz, however, was finally sunk in 1944 by British bombers, having never sunk an enemy ship. As a result, Churchill was able to tell the British and the world that we're not done yet. It's a pretty amazing story, huh? Told you it would be. That is probably the greatest piece of military history that I've ever read. And there's a really good documentary on it that's narrated by Jeremy from Top Gear. You find it on YouTube. It's called The Greatest Raid There Ever Was, I think. But yeah, I recommend you guys look that up. It's a really good documentary. It goes into a lot more detail about Operation Chariot. So what does all that translate to in-game for the Campbeltown? Well, it doesn't really live up to its hype. I'll give it that. It is a Tier 3 British destroyer, so it's not going to have a whole lot of oomph to it. What it does have, though, is torpedoes with 7.5 kilometer range, which is absolutely outstanding. They only go, I think it's 54 knots, so they're not going to be super fast, so making use of that range, you'll only really be able to do against stupid battleship drivers, I guess. But, yeah, using that 7.5 kilometer torpedoes really comes in handy in situations like this. It has 3 deck guns. I'm not sure what the caliber of them is off the top of my head, but you don't really want to treat this thing as a gunboat, because a gunboat it is not. It is a torpedo boat. You're going to lie in wait, drop your torpedoes, get out of there. It's not the slowest ship, I feel, that I've ever been in, but it's definitely not the fastest. And they did take into account its slow turning circle and its lack of maneuverability. This thing isn't as maneuverable as some of the American destroyers, and definitely not as maneuverable as some of the Russian or the Japanese destroyers. So we got torpedoes going out now against this battleship. I managed to lose eyes on them just before I dropped torpedoes, but I really want to get out of here because I don't want to be sitting in that same spot before he turns that corner and effectively one-shots me. I'm trying to cap the enemy base here because it's quickly coming down to the end of the game here. We have, I think, under 5 minutes now. Dropping my smoke. There we go. Battle ends in 5 minutes. Smoke screen set, trying to get some distance between myself and that battleship as I'm continuing to cap. I don't expect him to sail into those torpedoes, and it doesn't look like he is. No, they've gone way past him now. I've managed to successfully pick up 3 kills so far in this battle, which is absolutely amazing. I've played a couple games in this ship so far and have been pretty successful, but never achieved as much success as I have here. The battleship has spotted me. I am well aware that his guns are reloaded, so I turn and face him beam on, present myself as the smallest target as I possibly can. Get as close as I possibly can as my torpedoes are now loaded. Oh my god. My repairer party is on a minute cooldown. He just took out my engines. I am dead in the water. My torpedoes are away. I'm hoping that he's just distracted here and not paying attention to where he's going. It looks like he's going to continue to sail in a straight line. That is I think it's a South Carolina Tier 3 battleship. Those torpedoes are sailing true. 1 hit. 2 hits on him there, taking out a big chunk of his health. I managed to get my engine repaired, and I'm back up underway now. However, his guns have got to be reloaded by now, as I'm just plugging away here. There's no point in trying to sail away and become undetected. I'm far too close. Completely missed with all of his shots. Excellent. It's going to be a little while before he's reloaded, and he's on low enough health. If I could just set him on fire. This was, whoa, nice little lag spike there. Slowing down now because I don't want to get behind that island and lose my, oh, yes. 4 kills, ladies and gentlemen. In the Tier 3 destroyer Campbeltown. That's awesome. Let's look at the post-game stats. 196,000 credits. Nearly 6,000 XP. I do have a ton of signal flags and things going right now on this thing. I did manage to complete a key contribution, which I think gives me like a 50,000 credit bonus. I'm not sure. Dealing 62,000 damage over the course of this battle. Not surprisingly, top of my team. What is that? 1,127 base XP. I love the new menus, by the way, they put into the game. Breaks down all the ships you did damage to. I did 10,000 damage to that friendly Karlsruhe. I feel so bad for that. But, I mean, hey, I warned him in chat, and you do get a torpedo warning, so it's his own fault, not mine. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I had a blast making this video. I have a ton of respect for the Campbeltown and the British commandos that operated on board. Well, I think that just about wraps it up, though. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I had a blast making it. The Campbeltown holds a special place in my heart. It's an excellent piece of military history, and it was an honor putting together this video today. As always, give the video a like down below if you liked it. Comment if you have a comment or question for me. And as always, have fun doing whatever it is you're doing. Do it to the best of your ability, and I will see you when I see you. Take care.